Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Needens. I'm one of the social workers with the Cognitive Care Network here at KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And we're going to talk about the many faces of grief. Some of what you would say, gosh, that's really a grim topic. And I'm trying my best to be positive and to move forward. And I would say to you, I applaud that, and I want you to be positive and move forward. But in order to do that, it is important and necessary to recognize some of the losses and deal with them as you go. For some of you, you would tell me that that grief experience really is overtaking you, and that you are walking in deep water in trying to manage the overwhelming sense of loss and figuring out how to move forward. And I would say to you, in a discussion about some of the tasks of grief work, you may see some direction in terms of how to address some of those feelings. All in all, we can all agree and recognize that these cognitive disorders do not come without some losses. And that part of our work is not only supporting the person with the disease, not only managing to take care of ourselves and not lose ourselves, which is really important. Part of that experience is managing the losses as they go. It is never about a diagnosis itself. It's always about the components. In other words, it's not just about Alzheimer's disease, it's about all the little pieces that we lose along the way. Those are the elements that add the pain. Those are the elements that we need to process. So there's some universal elements of grief in dementia. This says Alzheimer's disease, true with all the dementias. There's certainly some uniqueness. Losses are individually defined. What I would consider a loss, you may say is not that significant to you, or it doesn't take the same shape in your world. All of that is true, but there are some pretty universal experiences of loss. And first and foremost, it's most typically a deviation from assumed or expected course of life. It just isn't how we thought life was going to quite go. And you may be in all kinds of different situations that this is a very significant loss for you. Perhaps you're supporting someone who has younger onset, and this was a diagnosis out of the blue, certainly not anywhere within the universe that you expected was going to happen. Maybe you're in a second marriage and you've only been with a person a few years and then diagnosed. And again, this is a surprise and a deviation of what you expected. I think for most people, there is this sense of this isn't exactly how I thought it would go. Even if you thought because of family history or other things that your spouse or your parent might get this, whatever it is, whatever type of dementia, there's still a surprise oftentimes in terms of it's now. So there's that, the deviation from expected course of life. Requires a consciousness about both the relationship and the day-to-day life. So we pay more attention how we say things. We lose you remember when, don't you remember? We have to lose those things. So we become more aware of what we're saying and potential reactions. And certainly as the disease progresses, our communication has to shift significantly. So that unconscious, familiar, easy conversation where everything was okay, where we knew how to navigate, changes a bit. Forces a relinquishing of previously defined tasks. can happen a little bit in early stage and begins to happen more and more significantly for those of you who are supporting people with middle stage on. Maybe he always took care of the finances and now you are. Maybe you always managed the driving, and now this person, the person that you're supporting is resisting some of that. So, some of those tasks become different. And for you, the care partner, it's usually you're assuming more and more tasks. It's not you're relinquishing, but it forces the division of labor between you and the person that you're supporting to change. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe your father, your mother was the person you always went to for advice. But it forces this change with, how does division of labor go? How does this relationship and the responsibilities on both sides look? And then it disallows the illusion of independence. We are never, ever independent creatures, not ever. And if we didn't know that before, we most assuredly have learned that in COVID, where people feel acutely the stress and strain of isolation and not being around people and doing things as we did before. And so we understand that we are dependent creatures and we need other people. But with these cognitive disorders, there is a more acute sense of that. That absolutely we need other people and it feels differently, and perhaps what we need them for is different. So for families in early stage, there's a set of very common grief issues, fears about future incapacity. What's going to happen? Am I going to be able to manage it? Assuming those new roles, sometimes that can overwhelm you. I'm not used to managing the investments, or I'm not used to managing the yard care. I'm not used to calling all these people to help me with home management. There's this desire to protect the person and acute grief when we see someone who looks at them differently or responds negatively in some way. For some of you, you're not natural caregivers. And part of your grief reaction is kind of a rejection of that. I don't want to do this. This isn't what I want to do. There's certainly an exposure of any historical communication or relational struggles. Let's be real honest. Not everybody has perfect relationships. Some people have really tough relationships. Some people have relationships that were more problematic than reciprocal. And whatever those are, gets exposed, sometimes exaggerated in this process. And then grief also includes differing view among family members. So in early stage, because people are so capable, they can certainly appear completely normal, maybe to sister and brother when they visit out of town, or adult children when they visit out of town, but you certainly see some of the changes. And when you talk about them, perhaps kids or siblings or whatever imply you're exaggerating or don't believe you or minimize in some way, or disbelief, a diagnosis, and tell you, they think it's wrong, that there's nothing wrong, etc. That all adds some grief. In middle stage, loss of relationship as it was known prior, just the physical and mental demands of caregiving add grief. When we're tired, that grief feels so much more acute. Placement thoughts and decisions. People will tell me it's the hardest decisions that they've ever had to make. Sense of failure as a caregiver. There are so many care partners out there doing a tremendous, tremendous job who virtually never give themselves credit for all the things they do right. They do one thing that they believe to be wrong, and that defines how they see themselves as a caregiver. The increased likelihood of physical or verbal abuse. People can become more and more frustrated with the person with the disease. It's especially when clinical depression in you, the care partner, is alive and well. Isolation, just in terms of managing the person and inability to get sufficient respite, or trouble getting the person out and about, or their rejection of getting out. Fears around your own security, and the reactions of others to the person, I think, become more significant. So people who stop, friends that stop visiting, faith communities that don't call and check on you, those kind of things can contribute to grief. In late stage, it's the struggle with connecting with a person, struggle with accessing good care. Those of you may have, some of you may have people you're supporting that live in long-term care facilities, or heavily reliant on in-home care. A sense of hopelessness in protecting and defending the person, especially as we see dependency on long-term care facilities. End of life decisions. Should I follow up with this possible medical concern? Do I continue this medicine? All of those kinds of things. Do I treat, acute infectious process? All of those decisions can be torturous. Guilt around private thoughts of wanting this to end, wanting the person's life to end. I will say, of the thousands and thousands of people that I've talked to in my almost 4 decades of working with people with cognitive changes, very, very few, less than a handful maybe, would have not said to me at some point in middle late stage, I think it would be better if they just passed away. It is almost universal that people have that thought. They may not share it. You may not feel comfortable with acknowledging that thought, but it is shared by 99.9% of care partners. Societal oversimplification of the loss. If a person is placed, a society that doesn't necessarily realize you are still a care partner, you still have responsibilities, there's still stress and grief associated with that. And certainly when someone dies, that's a new experience. That's not the same kind of a loss as those you experienced in the disease process. People that say, you lost him a long time ago, or, you're free of it now. And, it's not acknowledging that, gosh, death is still a new loss. It's not the same. And there's still a set of feelings that go on with it. And then judgment of others, people telling you what you need to do, that may not know, that may not understand the significance, and certainly may not be there to help you, but are more than willing to tell you what needs to happen. So we're going to talk through the 5 tasks of grief work. So you're likely you have recognized some of those grief issues. And there's a million others that we haven't talked about. And again, there's lots of individualization with what that experience is. But what do we do about it? So the grief is there, we acknowledge it, we are defining those loss experiences for us individually. Well, Eric Lindeman was a psychiatrist in the early part of the 20th century that resided in Boston during the Coconut Grove Club fire in those years, as prior to regulation among how many people could be in a building at the same time. There were many people in the building, and when the fire broke out, there was hysteria, and so many people, and people couldn't get out. People were trapped in, lots of people lost their life, lots of people were disabled, had serious injury from that fire. And Lindeman did research both on the survivors, those that were without fire-related disability, those that sustained long-term disability, and the families of those who lost their life. And he recognized in working with those families that some were able to assimilate the loss in their life and move on, That doesn't mean necessarily getting over it. It means that, you recognize it, it gets assimilated as part of your living experience, but you're able to make plans and see positives and keep moving forward. And others got stuck. And they never really were able to move beyond their experience of the fire. It really defined their life after that. And Lindeman wanted to know, why did some people get stuck and some people able to assimilate the loss and move on? And he realized through his research that it really came down to people who were able to move through these 5 tasks. And we're going to talk about them individually. 1, accept what has been lost. In these cognitive disorders, it can be a moving target. If you're supporting someone with Alzheimer's disease, over time, of course, the disease progresses. So you're always having to adjust and accept different loss experiences. The obvious and overarching losses can overshadow the subtle, more private losses. In other words, you may not recognize some of those very private losses. I had a care partner say to me recently that one of his significant losses was he just so missed the time right before they went to sleep. They were in bed and they just would visit. Historically, they would kind of process their day and review their thoughts before they went to sleep, that there was just this beautiful exchange of conversation before they went to sleep. That's what he missed the most. And so sometimes those kind of private losses are not acknowledged because what we see is, not able to drive anymore, or what we see is not able to work anymore, financial concerns. What we see these larger kind of issues, and these private losses go unattended. Our minds are focused on protection and care of the person with the disease. And sometimes that means minimizing and maybe not consciously, maybe consciously, some of the deficits that they present. There's good days and bad days, so we choose to see the good days, and the bad days we decide are just kind of aberrations instead of acknowledging some of those changes. And then, of course, anticipatory losses that oftentimes our mind is not only working on the current losses, but also those of which we see in our future. Are you stuck there? Is this the task that you're struggling with? Is this the task that you need to work on? How do you check yourself? So let's talk through that just a little bit. It can be the way we communicate. If you're testing your loved one, you remember that. Go down and get this. They're just manipulating. He can do this. She can do this. If you're still, the person's in middle stage and you're still trying to use logic and reasoning when they can't do it, those kind of things. If the way you communicate has not shifted based on the neurologic brain changes going on with the person with the disease, this might be a task that you're struggling with. Integration of help. If you're a person that says we don't need it, we don't need it, when lots of people around you are saying you need it. This might be a task that you're struggling with. If you feel like the person is responsible, they're just choosing not to do things. They're just choosing to be stubborn. They're just choosing to. And again, that's stage specific and that's unique to situations. But how we come to accept the diagnosis in someone we love certainly influences how we see accountability and responsibility. We might want to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Have others expressed their opinion that more help is needed? Has that come from multiple sources? Has other mentioned or suggested alternative ways to react to your loved one? And if the answer to those things are yes, this might be a task for you to explore. Experience and express the feelings around the loss. This is a tough one. There are 2 of these 5 that people are more likely to get stuck on, and this is number 1. And it's number 1 for a lot of different reasons. partly related to the length of the disease. You share about it at some point and talk with family and friends about it at some point. And oftentimes for many of you, there's a time where you come where you say to yourself, people are tired of hearing me and I don't want to keep bothering people, and you shut down or limit what you say. Sometimes it's just about the availability of others to listen. You're not out and about, you're busy providing care and taking care of the house and doing all those things that you need to do to make life work, and you just don't have access to other people, both in terms of positioning yourself for availability and time. For some of you, you are in active depression, and perhaps the majority of you, and that needs to be attended to, and can influence how we experience and express feelings. Privacy becomes an issue. Sometimes the person is right with you all the time. You really don't have a chance to be away from the person to just sit down with other people and be able to be honest and open about what's going on, or to go to a support group. When we try to block bad feelings, when we don't address the bad feelings or the negative feelings, the troubling feelings, good feelings are also often muted as well. So we become kind of more numb, kind of more apathetic, or people will say, I just really don't, I just don't feel, I just keep going, I just move, that's all. Expressing feelings can occur with natural or created support systems. You need to know that. Every family, every support system looks different. If you are a person who have few friends, you've been more of a private person, or you're at an age where many of your good friends are no longer living or available or in ill health themselves. If you are a person where your families have taken a turn that you didn't expect, adult children less available, not able to hear you. If you are a person where there's been abusive situations in your household, drug addictions, a host of reasons why family may or may not be available for you. It can certainly happen with created support systems, whether that be support groups or whether that be people in your faith communities or neighborhoods or clubs that might be going through the same thing, counselors. So it doesn't, if you don't have a natural support system where this is possible for whatever reason, it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It means that it needs to be created. And then when you are genuine, when you're honest about your feelings, it also frees other people to be open about their feelings. And what so often happens are those wonderful, real friends, you become closer. You really find out who can hear you, who can respond, who can support. Are you stuck here? Is this a task that you need to focus your energies on? Ask yourself these questions. Do you have friends and family that you are completely honest with? Many of you would tell me no. You might be stuck here. This might be something we need to work on. Do you take the time to attend the support groups? Do you tell yourself, that's the least of my priority because I've got to do these things, instead of looking for a way to make that happen? How often do you hide the feelings you're struggling with? How often do you feel no one understands you, or that your feelings are unique somehow, maybe even wrong? If these are often, maybe you're stuck here. Maybe this is a task that you need to work on. The third task is making decisions based on what is lost. There's some challenges specific to dementia with this one. Sometimes we're not sure about competence, especially when they're in that gray area. in making decisions. Do I need to take away driving? Do I need to take away the checkbook? Do I need to get rid of the guns? Do I need to leave our home and simplify or downsize? When is the right time to do this kind of stuff? And if the person is not in agreement, what do I do? Do I accept that resistance, and are they capable or competent to participate in those decisions? And that uncertainty, certainly that period of time where it's gray, can be tricky in terms of making decision. It often requires the aid of others, whether that be neurologists and providers and helping us understand that competence piece, whether it means our friends and family saying, you are worn out, something needs to happen. Or you're depressed, you need to see the doctor. So oftentimes we lose a piece of objectivity, and so it requires the aid of others to move forward. Certainly variation in the disease, good days, bad days, and that can confuse us a bit. We need to make decisions based on worst days, not best days. We are forced to acknowledge an end in some ways, whether that be the end of their driving, whether that mean placement, whether that mean someone else coming in to give a bath, whatever that is. It may be a beginning, it may be a positive, but it also forces us to acknowledge that there's an end. And sometimes acknowledging need for help, it is that acknowledgement that causes us the most significant barrier, and that has to be processed. Can get attached to our definition of a caregiver. I promised them that I would always take care of them, that piece. The concept of relinquishing and replacing that we've talked about before in other mindful minutes, that we have to give up it, but we also have to replace. So decisions sometimes can be complicated because we're not only making a decision perhaps to take away something or move, but we're also making a decision for some element of growth. Decisions are required even early on in the disease. And really, this task can be forced before we sort through our feelings. So when we think of the 5 tasks, they are not in order. There's no necessarily order to this. And sometimes we're put in situations where we are pushed into decisions before we've processed all the feelings around them. Are you stuck here? Is this the task that you need to work on? How do you check yourself? You think about these things. Am I attending to a driving issue? Is it, I just don't want to deal with it. So, I'm afraid to drive with them, but I'm going to just let them drive. Are you attending to the financial management? They're making crazy decisions, high risk decisions, but the resistance around making changes just too great. Or perhaps their joy in managing is so high that you struggle with taking it away and you just can't quite get there, despite the fact of the risk involved. What about leaving someone alone and safety monitoring? Is there evidence that they're not safe in the home, but you just can't quite bring yourself to get help in the home because that's a change and it's difficult? And do you process all of these things? Does your mind go over all these pros and cons and decisions, but you're unable to move beyond that? It just goes in this circular motion. And if you find yourself in any of these places where you're unable to move forward, or you feel like the barriers are too great, this is where you might be stuck and need to work on. The fourth, you may recall, I said that there were 2 tasks where people were most likely to get stuck, one being expressing the feelings around the loss. This is the second most common. Putting things in a wider context, what I call the why task. Why did this happen? Why did this happen to such a good person? Why now? This isn't fair. And when our mind gets stuck on some of those things, sometimes it's related to clinical depression. Sometimes it is related in clinical depression, it's just that pull to a place of which we no longer can be objective in any way, shape, or form, and everything seems dark. Sometimes it's related to this magnet, what I call the magnetized pull to a comparison. There's nothing like she was before. She never would have dressed like that. She never would have cussed. He never would have, tolerated this or that. Had a conversation with a family several months ago, just about the pain of watching a wife play with a doll. She enjoyed the doll. She thought it was a baby. She's very progressed in the disease. And yet that was very painful to watch her engage with a doll in such a loving way that in which she saw the doll as real. So this comparison adds pain. If we saw that moment, if we saw this woman loving and playing with a doll and joyful and content, on the objective outside view, we would say that's beautiful. But that magnetized pull to, this was who she was, and this is who she is. The pain was overcame him. That relates to this inverse relationship between concrete and abstract problems and resolutions. When the problem is very concrete, oftentimes the answer is very abstract, and certainly that's true with this task. If you have Alzheimer's disease, if you're supporting somebody with Alzheimer's disease, that's a very concrete problem, and the answer is abstract. What is quality of life? How do we define value for ourselves, for them? Where do we find peace in an experience where things are changing? So all of these things are abstract efforts. Opportunity to see growth and new things, that when we are able to put the loss in a wider context, it allows us to see all kinds of positives. Absolutely new experiences, deeper relationships, new way of seeing someone, opportunity to see exceptions, and graciousness through disease. Prerequisites are really required, and by that I mean it is necessary that some of those other tasks, such as acceptance and expressing feelings, are really required for this particular task. Are you stuck there? Is this the task that you need to work on? So I ask you these questions. Do you have the ability to answer the question why? Really doesn't matter what the answer is. Some people tell me it all happens for a reason. Some people will say, why not me? Life is random. Sometimes people will say, genetics are what genetics are, and we've got to expect it. Lots of answers to that. It really doesn't matter. It only matters that you have some peace around that you don't struggle with that question, that it doesn't linger in your mind. Do you return to the anger, regret, guilt of the past events? Do you get frustrated by people who talk about the positives that they have experienced or seen through this disease process, through the caregiving experience? And if the answer is yes to those latter two questions, then it may be that you're stuck here. It may be this is the task that you need to work on. And the last one is to connect to others who have experienced similar losses. There's nobody in this world that will understand better than someone who is in the same boat. And so finding those people, maybe it's support groups, maybe it's the friend that is in the same situation. Maybe it's someone in a social group or a faith community or whatever. Maybe it's someone on message boards, but someone that you have met that it has experienced similar losses. There can be challenges to this. Sometimes some of you will tell me, I just simply have no time. And there are circumstances where indeed that is the case, just how life circumstances are for some. Really important to try to fill that void somewhere and somehow, but it might need some creative processing. Sometimes it's simply about fatigue. I am so tired managing what I have to, I just don't have the energy to go to a support group or to arrange to have coffee with someone, etc. Sometimes it's about inability to leave the person and securing respite for that person. Sometimes about geography. You're not near a support group or have access to Zoom or whatever. So there can be barriers to overcome, but very, very important to connect with those with similar losses. Are you stuck here? How do you check yourself? Again, a question or two. Do I avoid conversations with others going through this experience of loss? Are you doing the opposite? Instead of sharing and seeking out people with similar losses, are you running from them because you do not want to hear? A belief that talking about things makes it worse. You go to support group one time because your family insists or somebody else told you you should, but all you hear is people's pain and you rule it out. Really going to support group, you got to go 3 times to give it a fair shot. Our minds have this innate ability to just hear the toughest stuff, almost to go in shock the first time. So very important to go more than once. This idea about grief and loss is acutely known by so many, millions really. I would say as we think about all the people over time who have supported someone with a cognitive disorder, there are people around you all over the place. Such a common set of diseases. We're going to end with a quote from another psychiatrist. We began talking about Lindeman. We're going to end with Frankel. So Viktor Frankel was a person who survived the Holocaust, watched his family killed in that experience, and went on to really process what loss and what suffering means in the search for meaning. And one of his most famous quotes was this: "Suffering ceases to be suffering the minute it finds meaning." I say to you, if you find yourself stuck in one of these tasks, reach out. Friends, family, counselors, reach out. You can do this. It's important to process some of the grief aspects as you go. They don't disappear, they pile up. So the addressing of those loss experiences allows you, to open your hearts and minds to the growth experience. And I wish you the best in that journey. Take good care.